God bless everybody today. It's October 17th of 2021. We're going to try to unpack Daniel 8 a little bit in conjunction to where we are in time today and what current events are happening around us that might bring this up and actually occur. This prophecy could be fulfilled in a year or less. I've been saying about 6 to 8 months. So Daniel had a vision. He was in a dream. He's taken into the palace of Shushan in the province of Elam, and he saw in his vision that he was standing by the river Ulai. And so I've shown you maps where this is so that you can understand this. So if we go out to the world maps, we can see where Baghdad is here, and this is Shush, Iran, and then you have the Iranian border between Iran and Iraq. This is the Elam province, so it's right around in here. So if you blow this up, you'll see sort of how this is all lined out. And then along the eastern side, there's a river that runs through here called the Ulai River. Okay, and so what the prophecy is saying is that when we get two nations together down in this area of Shush, we will see something occur. Or at least when two different kingdoms align and join, then we would see something happen. And I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. So John has this vision in Shushan, in the province of Elam, in the river Ulai, and he lifts up his eyes and he sees a ram with two horns, one higher than the other, and that two nations or two kingdoms were joined as one. And then, and we've talked about this a lot, and I'll go into more detail about what I meant by that. And then we see them, as we have seen Iran push westward, northward, and southward out of Iran through proxy wars. We've seen them basically do this for 10 years or more without anyone really hindering them at all, and so they've gotten away with this. But what tells us that they got away with this for a long time, but then a goat comes from the west, and he comes over and destroys this ram with the two horns, and that is standing before the river. Okay, and the river is Ulai. And so we want to look at that, and I'm breaking this down fairly quickly because I don't want to go through all this. You can read these passages and you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, but so this goat comes across from the west. I say the goat is from Turkey. It will be Erdogan, and it will be prior to the Ottoman Empire reforming, but this will be the destruction of Iran, and from this destruction we would see the new Ottoman Empire rebuilt and 10 Muslim nations forming to create then Ezekiel 38-39 in the next 2 to 3 years, which would then take us to Israel, and we would see attack of Israel by 10 nations. But Daniel 8 happens before this, okay? This is the catalyst that starts the crown given to the white horseman that compels him into power, because he's an insignificant person fairly much at the beginning. He may be a leader, but he's not really known, or he's not a major player. But this player will be a major player in the end as we move forward in the next few years. And so he's going to gain a lot of strength. And as this goat comes across from the west, he comes at the ram with the two horns, standing by the river Ulai, and he attacks him. And he basically breaks the two horns. He destroys the two nations, and he stamps on them, and then he becomes strong, and then the great horned turkey will be broken also, and then we will see an Antichrist come out. And like I've said, if you follow my timelines at all, and you can follow my logic based on the 117-step timeline I built directly out of the Bible, that the goat that destroys the two horns is Gog of Ezekiel 38 and 39, but he must accomplish Daniel 8 first, which will give him the power to create the new Ottoman Empire and the new caliphate against the Jews and the Christians. And from that, we would see him cast down and broken, because once Daniel 8 happens and Iran falls, then we would see a transition of him becoming the new Ottoman emperor. He'll be given the crown. This is the white horseman. Now realize the white horseman does not have a crown to start. He's given a crown. He's an insignificant person that's given a crown and then goes forth and conquers a quarter of the planet, which is in the Middle East. In the same footprint that Alexander's footprint was in the past, we will see a similar footprint in the future. And so what happens is, though he will create Daniel 8, he will destroy Iran and another kingdom that's joined them, and I'll go into that here in a minute, and that's why I wanted to show you this, because I believe this is starting to build up into this point. That once this Daniel 8 happens and Iran and this other nation fall, then he would start to build the Ezekiel 38, 39, 10 nations that will end up in Egypt. Then he's pulled back to the middle of the two seas, and then he attacks Jerusalem and Israel in the next 2 years, that he will also be broken. And so that's an extremely important. These verses are extremely important, 7 through 9 and Daniel 8. And the reason I say that is that if you take these 3 verses, they give you a transition, okay, from Gog, where he attacks Iran, forms into, and this is Daniel 8, that forms into Ezekiel 38, 39, which then attacks Israel over time, and then we see Gog die on the 6th seal. And from that, we will see a resurrectional event into the little horn Antichrist. Now, it's extremely important in 8 that we look at this transitional period here, because he tells you something extremely important in Revelation. We need to watch the 4 notable ones that are towards the 4 winds of heaven. So when he talks about the 4 winds of heaven, when does this occur? And how does it occur? Why does it occur? Why is it important? So let's go look at that real quick. So this is my 117-step timeline, and this can be found on the front of my Wix site, my free Wix site, on my eschatology page at endofdayssurvival.com. Okay, you can just go to the front page on my website, you come down, and there's 3 main PDF files. This is the first one. You just click on that, and that will give you this file. I've had to do it on Adobe Illustrator and convert it to a PDF, because this is a 4 by 8 foot chart, so you can't print it off, and so I did it like this so you could see it. So when you click on that link, this PDF will come up, and it will show you the 117-step calendar that I built from the beginning of Revelation in chapter 1 to chapter 22, and how if you cut out the 3 additional visions John has, one of the elect, the prophecy of the nations and peoples, and the prophecy of Mystery Babylon, that it is a chronological book. But if you come back to the 4 winds, he tells us something extremely important. I want to show you in this chart where that is. So if you go into my chart, which is the top portion up in here, like I say, this is 4 by 8 foot. You can't just print this off. You have to use this form to use this chart. Okay, but something extremely important happening in Daniel 8. He's telling us to watch the 4 winds. Okay, and this is extremely important because this is a chronological book. This can give us insight to what is happening here. Okay, so if Erdogan is the white horseman or first seal, or he's Gog, and he brings a quarter of the world into war, we see peace taken from the earth, we see famine, economic upheaval, and disease, famine, pestilence, all this stuff happening on the 3rd seal. The 4th seal is the death horseman, with Hades and hell following them. And I said, you got to watch that because you're talking about the bottomless pit is in hell. And why is Hades and hell following this white horseman? There's got to be a reason for that, and there is, and I'll show you why. Then the 5th seal are the martyrs that come up and say, look, when are you going to justify all this carnage on us over here? We've been holding testimony for you, and we're dying over here. And God says, look, I'm going to give you a white robe. You're going to rest until the rest of you join. And so, but I am going to fix this temporarily, and I'm going to pop the 6th seal, and by the wrath of God, the wrath of Jesus, or the Lamb, the Son, which is not the wrath of God, which is in 15, we would see the destruction of Gog and all his armies. And it says all men will hide in the mountains and hide from the face of God. As God is looking down, his Son is creating wrath upon the planet through his judgment against the armies that go against his people. And then something extremely important happens. I'm getting to the 4 winds now. On the 7th seal, we have a half an hour of silence, and the 7 angels are given the 7 trumpets. And it is in that procession of events, because if you go to 8, 1, and 2, it clearly tells you that all 7 seals are broken, and then he hands out the 7 trumpets to the 7 angels that go forth and blow. But this is extremely important because in the middle of this, between 6 and 8, we have the vision, the first vision John has of the elect. And it's extremely important that when you come down and you can follow this, these stars are the same events that happen down in the additional visions. So when he comes down in here, he says something extremely important in 7:1. He says, after these things, I saw 4 angels standing in the 4 corners of earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor the sea, nor any tree. So this is extremely important. He is holding back the 4 winds at the 7th seal. Okay, that's extremely important. So he's holding them back. Why is he holding them back? And when is he going to release these 4 winds? What is their purpose? So right now, we've had all 6 seals broken. We've had a half an hour of silence. We've had the selection of the 144,000. And at that very moment, we're seeing that the 4 winds are being held. So when do they release the 4 winds? On the 6th trumpet. This is extremely important. The angels loosen the 4 winds on the 6th trumpet. And if you come down here and look at that, that is in Revelation 9, 13, and 14. So if we come into Revelation 9, verse 13 and 14, it clearly states, when the 6th angel sounded his trumpet, now we're in the trumpet phase, remember in 8, 1, and 2, the seals are all broken, the 7 seals are broken, You have a half an hour of silence, then he hands out 7 trumpets. And so now we are down the road here a little ways, and the 6th angel is sounding. Well, what happens when the 5th angel sounds his 5th trumpet? That is when the bottomless pit opens. So realize what's happening here. So the pit is opening. That pit that's that's actually following Gog in the 4th seal. Hades and hell is following him. The bottomless pit now is opened. The 6th angel sounds. And what happens? The Antichrist and the false prophet rise on the 6th trumpet, and he loosens the 4 angels with the 4 winds. Okay? This is extremely important because now he's telling you the Antichrist is on the ground, and we have a risen Antichrist and false prophet on the ground at this very moment. This is the time, this is the very moment Antichrist appears. He's being thrown out of heaven in Revelation 13. It's telling you, Isaiah 14 says the same thing. He's being cast out of heaven, and he's not going to join the grave. This thing is going to be cast out like an abominable branch, which is a dead Gog, and that he will be resurrected into an Antichrist figure called at the end. So it's important that we understand how this works and that where we are in the timeline. So if the 7th seal is when the 4 winds are being held back, and the 144,000 are being selected. And like I say, if you cut out the 7th chapter, it makes complete sense and logical transition because you go from the 6th seal to the 7th seal. And then he wants you to understand by coming down into the 7th seal when the 144,000 are selected, that this is what's going to happen to them down here. Okay? And this is chapter 7 is all about the 144,000 and how they're going to be selected, how they're going to basically go up against Antichrist, and they're going to mostly perish. If he doesn't shorten the second half, they would all perish, and that they will then transition into the millennial kingdom over time. And so, but it's extremely important that the 4 winds that are being held here are being released up here on the 6th trumpet. He releases those 4 winds, which ushers in Antichrist and the false prophet. And nothing's been broken here in the chain of in chronological events here. The only thing that's been cut out up to this point is chapter 7, which is prophecy against the elect. So you can go down this whole, just following along in your book, in your Bible, King James Version, from verse Revelation 1 all the way over to basically Revelation 10:7 is where we start to see a new transition, because then John's given a scroll and then he's taken into the prophecy of the nations and peoples. And so if you cut that out, you realize that even in that transition, you go from the 6th trumpet to the 7th trumpet, and then into the bowl phase, because it is a chronological book. So if you realize that on the 7th seal, you have a half an hour of silence, the elect are chosen. That's why I cut this out, so you can see the prophecy against the elect. We start to see the 7th seal happen, and then he hands out the 7 trumpets. The 7 trumpets occur. Excuse me. And then on the 6th trumpet, we see the Antichrist rise. We see the 4 winds releasing the 4 winds. And we see that we should start to prepare for tribulation of the 1260 days. Okay? And like I said, if you go back even into 8:13, he's warning you even prior to this that John sees that eagle. That John sees that eagle flying through mid-heaven, and that he's warning us to watch for the 5th, 6th, and 7th trumpet. And what they have an attached woe, but we need to understand why this warning is so important. I built this whole chart off one verse. That's how important this one verse is, that you need to come up here and watch when the 5th trumpet happens. You're going to see the bottomless pit open, and Michael is throwing Satan out of heaven, and that the locusts come out for 5 months and torment the people without the seal of God. And then what happens? The 6th trumpet, the 4 winds loosen, or 4 winds are loosened. The 4 angels loosen those winds, and we see basically Gog resurrected out of the grave into an Antichrist, as Isaiah 14 tells us. And I've got a video about that if you want to go look at that. And also Revelation 13 tells us the same thing. He's going to be cast down to the planet. Woe to the earth. That Satan now is on the planet. He's going to impregnate the false prophet and the Antichrist. He's going to bring them forward. And on the 7th trumpet, what happens? The 7th trumpet happens, the 3rd woe occurs, and in 15:1, the 7 bowls are handed out, and then we see that the kingdom of the Lord is the kingdom of heaven with the kingdom of earth. Not that New Jerusalem's come down, but basically the story's over, and God is now dropping the 7 bowls of wrath, which occur over here. And so we need to understand the transition. Now, this calendar, this timeline, is built directly off verse, and so you can follow the verse. I can't change the verses. The verses are what they are. Everybody says, well, how do you know the timeline's right? Well, I build them directly out of the Bible, and so I can't change the verses, so I have to use the verses to make my story work. Okay? I can't just make this up. When it says, in 8:13 that 3 woes are going to happen, we need to be warned about that, and then those happen in the future. That must be how this occurs. And then when in Revelation 8:1 and 2, he says he breaks 7 seals, there's a half an hour of silence, and then he hands out 7 trumpets, you better make sure that your timeline reflects these things, because you can't not be literal in the sense that you're using what God gives you and you're not creating your own narrative. In 8:1 and 2, it clearly says the 7th seal is broken. All 7 seals are broken at that time. All 7 seals are broken, half hour of silence, and then and only then he hands out 7 trumpets. You better make sure your timeline fits this. And mine does, because it comes directly from the Bible. Each of these verses can be false. So if the 4 winds come out at the 6th trumpet, that's extremely important. I didn't mean to make this a lecture about the 4 winds and when they start, and when they, when they're being held and when they're released. But it is important to the timing of what we're understanding here. And so if you go into Daniel 8 again and you look at how this occurs, you're going to see the first seal, the white horseman, come out. He's going to create Daniel 8. That's going to turn into Ezekiel 38, 39. We're going to see him go up against the mountains of Israel, and on the 6th seal, through the wrath of the Lamb, or Jesus, which is not the same as Revelation 15:1, which is the wrath of God, which happens way over here. This is the wrath of the Son, and this is the destruction of Gog and his armies as they're attacking Israel with the 10 Muslim nations, and he destroys most of them because they leave a part of them in Egypt. Okay, remember, he goes from Iran, drives through the Middle East, goes to Egypt. Jeremiah puts the stones in the ground, says you're not going to go any further than this. Turkey gets a thought in his head that he needs to go back north. He's got to then leave 1/6 of his army. He pushes back up to the north between the 2 seas, and then he attacks Jerusalem and Israel. And he does not complete his task, because on the 6th seal he's destroyed. by the wrath of the Lamb. And so all these men die. Plagues are induced. They're all dead. A sixth are left behind. And there's a residue that forms around the city. And so the city's under siege for up to 2 years. And I've showed you how I believe that occurs in my paradigm. Then we have that half an hour of silence for the selection of the 144,000. And then look what happens. He fills up the prayers of the saints. He throws it down on the earth. And we start the trumpet phase. And a third of the planet is destroyed. Okay? I say those are the communist areas of Russia, China, maybe Indonesia. You just cut these out on the globe and you can see where the quarter of the world will be under war in the Middle East. And you can also see where a third of the planet could be potentially destroyed. And the communists aren't necessarily major Christian players, and this is a Muslim, Jew, Christian thing, and so the communists aren't going to be a major player. And I've always said that Rosh does not necessarily mean Russia, and so we want to look at that. It really means chief prince of Gog and Magog, which, depending on the maps that you look at, most of the really old maps, if you go back and really look at where they were when Daniel was on the map, is really in Turkey in Asia Minor. So, and they talk about the Grecian areas, and you talk about Rome being converted and moved into Constantinople, Turkey, and there's a number of things. So you have to really look at Turkey. The seat of Satan, or the seat of the beast is in Turkey, so we have to look at all that. But a third of the planet will be devastated. The fifth trumpet opens up the fifth bottomless pit. The locusts come out for 5 months. You see the rising of Antichrist and the false prophet. And then we start to release those winds. Those winds are released. And that occurs in Revelation 9:15. These are supernatural beasts. And that we should then prepare ourselves for the 1260 days, because the Antichrist will be on the ground for 1260 days between the signing of the treaty and abomination. And then we see, and this is also important because at this time the two witnesses appear. They prophesy for 1260 days, and then right before, right after abomination, they're destroyed, and the Lord says this is about over, and so the seventh trumpet happens. And I say that's when the Lord comes back, and the rapture of the elect saints and the people from, and martyrs from great tribulation. It specifies great tribulation, which is the time between abomination and the seventh trumpet. That time, that short period of time, is going to be for the rapture of those people. And look at that. On the seventh trumpet is blown. He says the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of his, Christ, or Jesus, and that he will reign over us forever and ever, and that we will see the return of the Lord on the white horse with all the armies prior to the God's wrath, because we're not ordained to the wrath of God. We don't see that. If you're a Christian, you won't see the seven bowls, which is God's wrath. We see the rapture of John seeing the glass and the fire and all those who had gained victory over the beast in his image. This is in order. You can go from the start of Revelation, if you cut out a couple chapters, which are the additional visions, and he shows you where those visions are, that this is all in order. And that once you see the rapture occur, they hand out the seven bowls. And we've seen all these events occurring, and they occur in chronological order. So when you look at Revelation, realize that the 22 chapters are placed in a specific order for a reason. That when you read the book itself, the 22 chapters, you realize that if you cut the 3 additional visions out, you have a chronological book. Revelation is like a computer with sub-programs or sub chapters that give us depth. It's like a microscope. And so when you come down into here, even though you have a specific point, you realize that that point is constantly reoccurring in the 22 chapters. And that's because of the visions John's having. He's given 3 additional visions so that he can give you depth. But in the main storyline up here, it's chronological. And so if you read the book in this order, you realize, wow, this makes sense. It's really not that hard, and you can follow along in your King James Version Bible. I thought I'd use that one because I think it's not altered as much as some of the other ones, and so it follows along with the Bible that I use, which is a revised standard version, like 1950 something. So look at how this is set up. If you read chapter 1 through 6, then 8 through 10, through 15 through 16, and 20 through 22, that it makes a complete story. And it's extremely important that when you look at that angel's warning over here in Revelation 8:13, where he talks about the 3 woes and 3 trumps, that these last 3 woes and last 3 trumps, which are the 5th, 6th, and 7th trumpet, can only occur up here once. Okay, but they're reoccurring constantly down here in his additional visions. One of the elect, the 4 chapters of the prophecy of the nations and peoples, and the 3 chapters, 17, 18, and 19 of Mystery Babylon. And if you cut that out, you can see that it's a chronological book. Now, something else I probably should tell you is if you come over to the side over here and you look at this chart here, this is a step-by-step informational. It adds depth to this timeline. I've tried to break everything down so it's step by step by step by step and what's occurring within those steps. And so if you look at this portion over here, it's a text file that goes through all of these steps and gives you more depth to the story. You can look at the additional visions that John has and how they're broken out, how these steps fall in line with all these other things that are occurring down here. And like I said, he's giving you a microscope. He's zooming down through the layers, and he's letting you unwrap this thing, unpack this thing so you can see what's really happening. And then at the bottom here, on this portion down here is the 22 chapters laid out. I just copied and pasted them from the King James Version. And if you blow these up, you'll start to realize that that each of these steps also work in conjunction with everything up on top. But you can then look directly in the Bible and you can see where the steps are laid out, so you can follow along. And this cross-references multiple different ways, so you can see how this is all laid out in different ways, but basically it says the same thing. And so you can see these stars down here. You can see they correlate with the prophecies of the 3 additional visions. I have the main chapters laid out up here with the 3 additional visions down here. And so you can follow along and see the whole story as you walk through the 22 chapters. And then you add the additional visions in. It gives you these color charts so you can actually see when these specific events happen, not only in the top, but on the text side, on the right side, that text file, it also has this, works with that also. And so if you work up the chart, you'll see that all these stars are also added in here, so you can see all this is depth. And that's what I've been trying to get, is depth into what we're seeing. We need to be able to understand what's happening out here. So if we go back to where I started, and hopefully I'm not way off topic at this point or confusing everyone. If you go back into Daniel 8 and you look at how Iran will be crushed by Turkey, and that will then fulfill the Daniel 8 prophecy, which then forms into Ezekiel 38:9 prophecy of 10 nations going basically to the east to Egypt and then up into Israel, and how that's going to affect us and convert into the Ezekiel 38:39 prophecy. This is extremely important, and there's a lot going on right now that tells us this is happening. So if you've been following anything that I've been showing you here lately, I believe that one of the main things of Daniel 8 is that in Daniel 8 prophecy, we need to watch the Kurds. So in Daniel 8:20, we see something extremely important. He says that the two kings, or the ram, are the kings of Media and Persia. Well, we know Persia is Iran. I believe the Medes, back in the day when the Medo-Persians, they were part of Iran, and were in conjunction with Iran. Daniel was through this period. He went through the Medo-Persians, Cyrus and all that. And so we need to understand that the Medes and the Persians will join, and then the king of Grecia or Turkey will come over and destroy them. And so who are the Medes? We know who Iran is. Those are the Persians. But who are the Medes? I say they're the Kurds. And so if that is the Kurds, and the Media and Persia have to join together before Grecia destroys them, then we will see the Kurds align with Persia prior to this happening. And that's important because after that, we see that it is broken, talking about the sixth seal, and that we would see then the Antichrist come forward. And so this is extremely important. So I've been keeping a pretty close on Erdogan and Turkey, and how Erdogan has been pummeling this northern border between Syria and Iraq. And if you move down here, you'll realize that Baghdad is down here, and Shush, Iran is over here. And so we've got to watch this, because if this is collapsing down into this area, and we see the Kurds join Iran, then we could potentially see, once this happens and they end up pooled between Baghdad and Shush, Iran, along Elam, around the Ulai River, we could potentially see Turkey come over and crush them. Okay? And Turkey now is strong-arming the Kurds. He's been genociding them for a long time, and now he's given them a final warning. So there was an attack on a few Turkish groups, and a few people were killed, and now Erdogan is in the process of basically saying, look, I've had all this I can take. If the U.S., Russia, and these other countries can't really deal with this area, then I'm going to deal with them, and the problem is the Kurds. And so he's giving them basically a timeline, I think, or that he's going to come in and basically start to really push these guys towards Baghdad and Shush, Iran, if they start mobilizing massive armor and bombing in those northern areas. Then that's going to start to collapse. And one of the major regional areas over there is Erbil. That's a capital of the Kurdistan people, and so we want to watch that, because if they get close to Erbil and we see that collapse, then we could see this deteriorate quickly. And so you can see that Turkey at this point is not going to tolerate the Kurds or the Medes, and I believe that this man here, who is Gog of Ezekiel 38:39, is the same person that's going to effectively create Daniel 8 first, and then form 10 nations, get to Egypt, get the thought, is pulled back to Israel, attacks Israel, and then dies on the sixth seal. As I've said so many times, from the wrath of the Lamb this man will die, and from this death of this man we will see a resurrection of an Antichrist figure in the future in about 2 to 3 years as we move forward. And I've shown you where on my timelines that will occur. But also, we have to watch the other regions and the areas, because Ezekiel 38 and 39 is starting to form also. Now, when Afghanistan fell, it was important that Turkey controlled the airport there, and now they basically control the Taliban, and the Taliban is holding talks with Turkish officials at this moment, and they're also talking about going into Azerbaijan and some of these areas, which is controlled by Turkey, because Turkey also is in coordination with Azerbaijan when they went against Armenia. And so this whole region is starting to inflame into an Ezekiel 38, 39 prophecy as we look. And there's even more if you go into Africa. So Turkey, not that he doesn't have enough going on, he's going to get ready to go down into Africa. This was on October 11th. And prepare a 4-day West Africa diplomacy tour, because he's getting ready to set up for, once Daniel 8 occurs and the destruction of Iran happens, he starts driving through the Middle East. He's going to end up in Egypt, and that's going to affect Africa. And 3 of the major kingdoms indicated in Ezekiel 38, 39 are African. So we need to understand those African nations are going to affect us and how that happens. And so if you go to the main map, I see this happening like this based on prophecy and how it's being shown to me and the dreams that I've had and different things. That Turkey, when they set up that 30-mile border, now is pummeling the Kurds. They're going to drive them down into Iran. Turkey will then come down and crush them. Iran will fall. Afghanistan's already fallen. We have to watch Afghanistan, because they're going to maybe potentially attack or affect Pakistan, but that's not part of the 10 nations. But so you got Afghanistan here, you got Iran. Once Turkey comes over and crushes Iran, then they will drive through Iraq and end up in Egypt. Remember, Jeremiah says the stones are placed here. They can't get through this area. They get stopped probably at this river and this ocean. And then they're going to be pulled back into Israel, attack Israel. And then we have what we call the kingdoms of, or the king of the north and the south, constantly attacking each other. So you got Turkey, which is the king of the north, and you got Egypt, which is king of the south. And because they have not broken into Israel, they're going to have these battles. I wish this wouldn't do that. They're going to have these battles back and forth between Turkey and Egypt. And right there is Damascus. And so, as you can see, as they go through these areas and have these battles back and forth as Israel's being under siege, Damascus isn't going to stand much of a chance. And so, from Turkey, crushing Iran, completing Daniel 8, driving to Egypt, and then forming 10 nations as they go. This includes Libya, Sudan, and Ethiopia, which are the 3 nations from Africa, with the 10 nations of Muslims will come into Israel. They'll attack Israel, and because Turkey is the white horseman or first seal, creates Daniel 8, creates Ezekiel 38 and 39, ends up in Israel, he will die on the 6th seal when the wrath of the Lamb or Jesus destroys him. And from that, We will see a burial of 7 months in the graves of dirt, and we will see the burning of the weapons for 7 years, alluding to an upcoming tribulation, great tribulation period, and that from that destruction of Gog being buried in the ground, we would see a resurrection of an Antichrist figure in the next 2 to 3 years. And that is saying a lot, but you can go in and you look at Isaiah 14 and Revelation 13, you'll realize that when Satan is cast down, he impregnates, resurrects this being out of the ground into the little horn. Isaiah 14 clearly says that Satan will not meet the grave. He will not be in the grave, but from that grave, from hell, will spring forth an abominable branch, which I believe is a resurrected Gog. But if you go into Daniel 8, which is what we're talking about, and you go into Iran, and you look at this map a little closer, this is extremely important as we look at this, because Afghanistan's basically been taken over. Okay, Turkestan could be a player here. This is something that I've looked into. It could be. He talks about the Turkestan nations and how this is potentially part of the 10 horns. So, I talk about Armenia and Azerbaijan, but Turkestan also could be part of that footprint. So we have to watch the Turkestan nations. But okay, so if Turkey sort of, controls this area through the Turkestan nations, Afghanistan is basically taken out. Azerbaijan, Armenia is controlled by Turkey. The Taliban is working with Azerbaijan to control this area now. And you get down into Iraq, which is where Syria and Iraq is where Turkey's got the front controlling it, that the Kurds are going to be shoved down from this area here all the way down to Baghdad and then be pushed to Iran, where we see Shush down in here, that we're going to start to see the forming of Daniel 8 fairly soon, I would think. And now that Erdogan is basically saying that he's the last straw. He's not going to let the Kurds hold out much longer here. He's going to start a new offense against them. It clearly tells us this was in the last few days, and that if we see a diplomatic fail, Turkey, without anyone's consensus, he doesn't care. He could care less whether we join him or not. The United States, Russia, or anyone else on the planet, that he will go against the Kurdish people and drive them down and potentially create Daniel 8 in the next 6-8 months, less than a year. If we see the Kurdish people form and start to move down to that area around Elam, around the Ulai River, and we see this forming of the Medes and the Persians, or the Kurds in Iran, then I would say we will see an attack by Turkey shortly after that, and that it tells us it's like a whirlwind, and so we will see that destruction come upon fairly quickly when it does occur. God bless everybody. I just wanted to go over a few of these things, how Daniel 8 is affecting us now, how modern day events are also occurring around us that are also affecting us in real time, and that we need to understand the players. And one of the players that we need to understand is Gog of Ezekiel 38 and 39, and why he is not Antichrist or Satan. And we can clearly determine that because Gog of Ezekiel 38 and 39, in my opinion, is the white horseman, and he will die, and all of his nations will be buried with Gog in a dirt grave in Ham and Gog in northern Israel, as they're attacking the nations of Israel and then they burn the weapons and fuels for 7 years and bury these bodies for 7 months, alluding to an upcoming tribulation, great tribulation period. And that if you look at Antichrist and Satan, you'll realize that if you go into the 6th bowl event in Revelation 16 and 20, that Satan and Antichrist and the false prophet all are thrown in the lake of fire. They cannot be that Gog of Ezekiel 38:39 is not Antichrist or Satan, and that this is a prior war I call a seals war that is actually taking effect now. It's being formed in front of us. That's going to come upon us within the next start of it has already happened, and within the next month we could see a potential fall of a major nation called Iran. But you got to watch the Kurds, because they're the key to understanding where this is going. God bless everybody. Have a great day.